Sir, step away from that door. Are you trying to force entry?
I'm unlocking my office. I work here.
After hours? That's suspicious. I need to see
It's
ID.
inside, on my desk. That's why I'm opening the door.
Don't reach for anything yet.
So I can't open the door and I can't prove I work here?
I just need cooperation.
You're getting it from the public defender assignment.
Officer Jason Kemper had been with the Portland Police Department for 3 years, but his tenure was marked by a pattern that supervisors had repeatedly ignored. He generated 11 complaints in 36 months, all involving stops where he'd assumed criminality based on appearance rather than evidence. One Thursday evening in downtown Portland, Kemper made a decision that would cost the city $2,700,000 and permanently end his law enforcement career. A 34-year-old attorney, David Richardson, was attempting to unlock the door to his own law office, Suite 431, on the 4th floor of a downtown building after realizing he'd forgotten his identification badge inside. No crime, no break-in, no complaint. Just a lawyer working late, doing exactly what thousands of professionals do every night in office buildings across America. But Officer Kemper saw something else entirely. He saw a black man in business attire standing at an office door after hours, and his bias convinced him that something criminal was happening. That false assumption triggered an unlawful detention, a wrongful arrest, and consequences that would expose an entire department's failure to address racial profiling. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Downtown Portland, Oregon, the Pearl District, where tech startups share buildings with law firms and consulting agencies. Modern office towers with glass facades reflecting the city lights. It's the kind of area where professionals work until midnight chasing deadlines, where security guards know the regulars by name, where nobody thinks twice about someone entering an office at 10 o'clock at night. It was 22:41 on a Thursday evening in July. The summer sun had set hours earlier. The building's hallways were quiet but not empty. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The elevator dinged occasionally as other late workers came and went. Normal, safe, ordinary. David Richardson had been a public defender for 9 years. 9 years representing clients who couldn't afford private attorneys. 9 years fighting for people the system had already decided were guilty. 9 years in courtrooms, negotiating plea deals, preparing for trials, reviewing evidence until his eyes burned. His colleagues called him relentless. His clients called him a lifesaver. Judges respected his preparation. Prosecutors knew he didn't back down. He'd graduated from Lewis and Clark Law School with honors. He'd clerked for a federal judge. He could have taken a corporate position making 3 times his public defender salary. But that wasn't why he'd gone to law school. He'd watched his own uncle get railroaded through the system when he was 16. Overworked public defender, coerced confession, 15 years for a crime he didn't commit. That experience had shaped everything. So David had chosen public service. He'd chosen to represent the people who needed him most. And he'd opened his own practice 2 years earlier, handling criminal defense work on a sliding scale, taking cases that other attorneys wouldn't touch because they weren't profitable enough. His office was Suite 431 inches, a mid-rise building on Northwest 10th Avenue. Small space, 1 room, a desk, 2 client chairs, filing cabinets packed with case files. His law degree hanging on the wall next to his bar admission certificate. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his. That evening, he'd been working on a motion to suppress evidence for a client whose 4th Amendment rights had been violated during a traffic stop. The irony wouldn't be lost on him later. He'd worked until his eyes couldn't focus anymore. Just after 22:30, he'd packed his laptop into his messenger bag, grabbed his suit jacket, and headed for the elevator. He was wearing charcoal gray slacks, a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and black leather shoes. His messenger bag hung across his shoulder. He looked exactly like what he was, a professional finishing a long day at the office. He'd gotten to the elevator, pressed the button, waited, and then he'd realized his employee ID badge was still sitting on his desk. He needed it to get into the parking garage. Without it, he'd be locked out, unable to access his car, so he'd turn around and walked back down the hallway to Suite 431. He'd pulled out his keys, selected the office key, inserted it into the lock. Completely normal, completely legal, completely innocent. But Officer Jason Kemper didn't see it that way. Officer Kemper had been assigned to downtown patrol that evening. His shift had started at 2200. He was supposed to be monitoring the bar district, checking on business closures, responding to noise complaints, standard Thursday night patrol. But Kemper had a habit of wandering into office buildings. He'd cruise through parking garages, walk hallways, check door handles. In his mind, he was being proactive, preventing crime before it happened, catching burglars before they could steal anything. His supervisors had never told him to stop. In fact, they'd praised his initiative. Kemper had made 6 arrests for trespassing in his 3 years on the force. Never mind that 4 of those arrests had been thrown out because the people he detained actually worked in the buildings. Never mind that the other 2 had resulted in complaints about excessive force. The department counted them as wins, proactive policing, prevention. That evening, Kemper had entered the building on Northwest 10th without any call for service, no alarm, no complaint, no reason. He just walked in through the unlocked lobby and taken the elevator to the 4th floor. He'd stepped out into the hallway and immediately saw David Richardson standing at the door to suite 431, key in hand, unlocking his own office. And in that moment, Officer Jason Kemper's bias took over. He saw a black man in business attire at an office door after hours. In Kemper's mind, that could only mean one thing. This wasn't a professional working late. This was a burglar in disguise. Someone trying to break into an office and steal computers, files, valuables. Kemper didn't consider that the man had a key. He didn't consider that the man was dressed professionally. He didn't consider that there might be a completely innocent explanation. He just acted. You think officers should be allowed to enter private buildings without cause? Drop your answer below. Officer Kemper walked quickly down the hallway toward David, his hand moving to his belt, his voice loud and authoritative. "Sir, step away from that door." The command echoed in the quiet corridor. David turned, surprised. He saw the uniform, the badge, the aggressive posture. He'd been through this before. Not often, but enough to know how it could go wrong. "Good evening, officer," David said calmly, his hands visible, the key still in the lock. "What can I do for you? You trying to force entry?" Kemper's tone was accusatory, confrontational. David blinked. "Force entry? I'm unlocking my office. I work here." After hours, Kemper stepped closer. "That's suspicious. I need to see ID." David felt the familiar weight of frustration settling over him. "It's inside, on my desk. That's why I'm opening the door. I forgot it when I left a minute ago." Kemper's eyes narrowed. Don't reach for anything yet. And there it was. The moment when a completely innocent action became criminalized. David Richardson, a licensed attorney, standing at his own office door with his own key, was being treated like a suspect because Officer Kemper couldn't imagine that a black man might belong there. "So, I can't open the door," David said, his voice steady but edged with controlled anger. "And I can't prove I work here? I just need cooperation," Kemper replied, as if that explained everything. David looked directly at the body camera on Kemper's chest. "You're getting it," he said quietly, "from the public defender assigned to this building." The statement should have made Kemper pause, should have made him reconsider, should have triggered some recognition that he might be making a mistake, but it didn't. Because in Kemper's mind, criminals claim to be everything: lawyers, doctors, business owners. It was a deflection tactic, a way to avoid accountability. This is where bias becomes dangerous. Officer Kemper had already decided what he was looking at. A black man at an office door after hours wasn't a professional working late. It was a crime in progress. And no amount of explanation was going to change his mind. "I need you to step away from the door and put your hands where I can see them," Kemper said, his hand now resting on his service weapon. David's jaw tightened. He'd spent 9 years in courtrooms arguing about unlawful stops, unreasonable searches, violations of constitutional rights, and now he was living it. "Officer," David said, keeping his voice controlled, "my name is David Richardson. I'm an attorney. This is my office. Suite 431. My name is on the door. My bar card is inside on my desk. I have a key because I own this practice. You're stopping me without probable cause." Kemper moved closer. "I'm investigating suspicious activity." "What suspicious activity?" David's voice was louder now, frustration breaking through. "I'm unlocking a door with a key. That's not suspicious. That's normal. At this time of night, in an office building?" "Yes," David said emphatically. "Attorneys work late. That's what we do. Look at the door. The sign says David Richardson, attorney at law. That's me." Kemper glanced at the small placard on the door. Suite 431, David Richardson's office. But instead of backing down, instead of apologizing for the misunderstanding, Kemper doubled down. "I still need to verify your identity." "Then let me open the door so I can show you my ID," David said, his patience wearing thin. "No, you're not going inside until I can confirm you have a right to be here." "This is insane," David said, shaking his head. "You're detaining me for entering my own office." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Kemper ordered. David's eyes widened. "You're arresting me? I'm detaining you pending verification." "Verification of what?" "I've told you who I am. I've told you this is my office. I have a key. What more need? Kemper reached for his handcuffs, turned around, and in that moment, David Richardson, a public defender who'd spent his entire career fighting against this exact kind of abuse, had to make a choice. Comply with an unlawful detention and let the system violate him, or resist and risk escalation. He chose to comply because he knew what happened to black men who didn't. Should attorneys be immune from wrongful stops in their own workplaces? Let me know what you think. David turned slowly, his hands raised. I'm complying under protest, he said clearly. For the body camera. This is an unlawful detention. I'm an attorney entering my own office. You have no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, and I'm gonna file a complaint the moment you release me. Kemper pulled David's arms behind his back and snapped the handcuffs on. The metal bit into David's wrists. The indignity burned deeper than the physical discomfort. This is what racial profiling looks like when it's backed by a badge. A black attorney in his own building, at his own office, with his own key, being handcuffed because an officer couldn't conceive that he belonged there. A door opened down the hallway. Another attorney, Sarah Chen, who worked 2 suites over, stepped out. She'd heard the raised voices. David? She called out, confused. What's going on? David turned his head toward her. Sarah, I'm being arrested for trying to enter my office. Sarah walked quickly toward them. Officer, that's David Richardson. He's a public defender. That's his office. He works here every day. Kemper barely looked at her. Ma'am, step back. This is police business. Police business? Sarah's voice rose. He's been in that office for 2 years. I've worked with him on cases. This is ridiculous. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again. Step back. Sarah pulled out her phone and started recording. I'm calling building security and the bar association. This is harassment. Kemper radioed for backup. Dispatch, this is Unit 15. I need another unit at 1040 Northwest 10th Avenue, 4th floor. Possible trespassing arrest. Also have an uncooperative witness on scene. Within minutes, a second patrol car arrived. Officer Linda Torres stepped off the elevator. She'd been on the force for 12 years. She'd worked with Kemper before, and she'd learned not to trust his judgment. What's the situation? Torres asked. Kemper gestured toward David, caught this individual attempting to break into an office. He claims he works here, but has no ID. Torres looked at David, then at the door, then at the sign that clearly read David Richardson's office. Kemper, she said quietly, his name is on the door. Could be coincidence, or he could be using a stolen key. Torres walked over to Sarah, who was still recording. You know this man? Yes, Sarah said immediately. That's David Richardson. He's an attorney. This is his office. He's here almost every night working late. Officer Kemper is making a huge mistake. Torres turned back to Kemper, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Uncuff him. Now. I was investigating suspicious activity. You are racially profiling a professional in his own building. Uncuff him before this gets worse than it already is. Kemper hesitated, his face flushing, but the damage was done. The body camera had recorded everything. The witness was filming. The evidence was undeniable. He unlocked the handcuffs. David rubbed his wrists, his jaw clenched, fury radiating from him. Torres stepped forward. Mr. Richardson, I apologize. This should never have happened. Would you like to file a formal complaint? David looked at her, then at Kemper, then at the camera still recording. Yes, he said, his voice tight. I absolutely would, and I'll be filing a lawsuit. This wasn't an investigation. This was racial profiling. Pure and simple. Building security arrived moments later. A supervisor named Marcus, who'd worked there for 6 years. He recognized David immediately. David, what the hell is going on? I was arrested for entering my own office, David said flatly. Marcus looked at Kemper with disgust. This is David Richardson. He's one of our regular tenants. He's here late almost every night. Everyone knows him. Kemper said nothing, because there was nothing to say. He'd profiled an attorney in his own building, arrested him without cause, and been proven wrong by multiple witnesses. Torres radioed dispatch. Cancel that backup. Situation resolved. And flagged this incident for supervisor review. Why do some officers see professional success in black individuals as suspicious rather than normal? Comment your thoughts. The story reached the Oregon State Bar Association by morning. A licensed attorney handcuffed in his own office building while attempting to enter his own suite. The outrage was swift and intense. The Portland Police Department received the formal complaint by noon. David Richardson's attorneys, because of course he had attorneys, colleagues who'd worked alongside him for years, filed a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit within 48 hours. The allegations were devastating. unlawful stop without reasonable suspicion, false arrest without probable cause, racial profiling in violation of constitutional protections, emotional distress and reputational harm, failure to train officers on implicit bias and reasonable suspicion standards. The body camera footage told the entire story. David identifying himself, David explaining he worked there, David pointing to his name on the door, and Kemper arresting him anyway. The city's attorneys reviewed the case and arrived at a grim conclusion within a week. This was indefensible. The evidence was overwhelming. The violation was clear. Settlement negotiations began immediately. The city settled 8 months later, $2,700,000, paid to David Richardson, funded by taxpayers who had to bear the cost of one officer's bias. Officer Jason Kemper was terminated 10 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final and unambiguous. Officer Kemper engaged in racial profiling and unlawful arrest. He detained a licensed attorney entering his own office without probable cause or reasonable suspicion. His actions violated department policy, state law, and federal civil rights protections. His employment is terminated immediately. Kemper's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. He would never work in law enforcement again. Not in Oregon, not anywhere. He attempted to appeal through the police union, but the union withdrew support once the Oregon State Bar Association submitted a formal complaint and the body camera footage became public. Kemper issued a brief statement through an attorney. "I made an error in judgment based on incomplete information. I take responsibility for my actions and apologize to Mr. Richardson." It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The Portland Police Department faced intense scrutiny from civil rights organizations, the Bar Association, and the Department of Justice. How had Kemper, with 11 prior complaints involving racial bias, remained on patrol? Why had supervisors ignored the pattern? What training existed to prevent officers from profiling professionals in their own workplaces? Internal Affairs launched a comprehensive review. What they found was systemic negligence. Complaints filed but not investigated thoroughly, training requirements completed on paper but not internalized, supervisors pressured to close cases quickly to meet administrative quotas rather than address underlying problems. The Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation focusing specifically on stops in downtown commercial areas. Reforms were announced within 6 months. Mandatory de-escalation training before any solo patrol assignments. Real-time body camera review for all detentions in commercial buildings. A dedicated civil rights unit to investigate discrimination complaints. Extended probationary periods with psychological evaluations for officers showing signs of implicit bias. David Richardson became an advocate, though he never wanted that role. He testified before the city council. He spoke at community forums. He gave interviews to local and national media. His message was consistent. "I had every advantage," he said during one testimony. "I'm an attorney. I know my rights. I have resources. I have colleagues who could help me. And I still got handcuffed in my own building for the crime of being black after business hours." What happens to people who don't have those advantages? What happens to delivery drivers, janitors, security guards, people who work night shifts and look suspicious to officers who've been trained to see black skin as threat? He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I defend people every day who've been stopped, searched, arrested without cause. I argue Fourth Amendment violations in court. I fight against this exact abuse. And then I lived it in my own office with my name on the door because Officer Kemper looked at me and couldn't imagine I belonged there." The courtroom where he testified was silent. David donated a portion of his settlement to organizations fighting police misconduct. He started a legal fund to help people without resources file civil rights complaints. He trained other attorneys on how to document and litigate unlawful stops. But the anger remained. The knowledge that he'd been violated in his own workspace. The memory of being handcuffed while Sarah recorded and Marcus vouched for him, and none of it mattered because Kemper had already decided he was a criminal. Should officers face personal financial liability for racial profiling cases? Let me know in the comments. This wasn't just a bad stop. This was a window into how bias operates when combined with authority and unchecked discretion. Officer Kemper didn't see an attorney working late. He saw a black man who must be doing something wrong. His bias was so ingrained that he ignored the name on the door, the key in the lock, the professional attire, the calm explanation. None of it registered because his worldview couldn't accommodate a black professional in that space. This is what systemic racism looks like when it's quiet and procedural. No violence, no slurs, just the assumption that black people don't belong in professional spaces after hours. just the refusal to believe explanations that would be accepted immediately from white professionals, just the weaponization of safety concerns to justify profiling. And when that bias is backed by a badge, handcuffs, and the authority to arrest, it doesn't just harm individuals. It reinforces the message that success, education, and professional accomplishment don't protect you from being seen as suspicious. It tells black professionals that they'll always have to prove they belong, even in their own offices. Jason Kemper's career is over. That's accountability. The city paid $2,700,000. That's justice, at least financially. But money doesn't undo the trauma. It doesn't erase the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of colleagues. It doesn't restore the sense of safety in your own workplace. The real question is, what changes now? Do departments finally take the 11 complaints seriously before they become number 12? Do they finally train officers that professional spaces include black professionals? Do they finally accept that proactive policing can't mean assuming criminality based on race and time of day? Because if we don't fix the system that put Jason Kemper in that hallway, if we don't address the bias that taught him to see a black attorney as a burglar, then we're just waiting for the next officer, the next victim, the next person who has to explain why they belong in their own building. Comment if this should be national law. Any officer who arrests someone at their own workplace, proven by documentation, equals immediate decertification. No appeals, no second chances. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, if you think accountability matters and reform starts with awareness, then hit that subscribe button, because we're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the professionals who deserve to work late without being treated like criminals. This isn't just about one officer or one attorney. It's about all of us and the system we're willing to accept.